So we did a Q&A on Instagram. We asked the people who know about our podcast to send in some questions about MBTI, about physiotype, about personality type theory in general. And we got some questions back. And so we're going to be doing a bit of recap of what we've talked about so far in physiotype. And then after that, we're going to get into these questions. So to get us started, real quick, super basic summary. Colby, would you be able to give us a summary of what is physiotype?
Physiotype is, for lack of a better word, a personality typing system. It was born from MBTI, though it is quite different. It consists mainly of 3 dichotomies, and those dichotomies are prone and supine, local and universal, and meta and mesa. And then just describe those 3 dichotomies very briefly. The prone-supine dichotomy. So people who are more prone are generally more action-oriented and less agreeable. People who are supine are usually more agreeable, less action-oriented. This tracks with like disagreeableness. So people who are prone are more likely to be in managerial positions just because they're more disagreeable. They're willing to say no. They're willing to do their own thing. They're more, dominant on average. And then going to local universal. Universal is actually it's a good word for this because it's actually used in metaphysics and maybe a few other niche fields to mean exactly pretty much what it means in physiotype. So universal means very concerned with abstracts, abstract objects, and big picture ideas. Basically, the one-liner for universal is universal things apply to more things, but less specifically. So they're like principles. So, when you use a principle, there's always exceptions and there's little circumstances within the actual experience that you're having. But the principle is very broad. It applies to lots of things, but maybe it doesn't apply like perfectly to anything. It's broadly useful, but in a micro context, it's just one piece, And so that's universal. Local would be something that is hyper specifically true, but not broadly useful. So let me say that. Let me try and say that one more time. Universal things are less true and more broadly applicable. Local things are more true and less broadly applicable.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Oh yeah, meta mesa. Meta mesa. Meta is about things. Meta is about relationships, and it's about descriptors, and it's about properties. Mesa is about the thing itself. So you're being meta if you're referring to yourself, of course. The traditional sense of meta is usually like recursion, but meta is recursion in the physiotype model, but it's also about self-reference as well as referencing other people. So it's about relationships, properties. It's about the details. Meta people will pack less things into abstract objects. This is because meta is more detail oriented. It's about how things work, kind of. And mesa is about the thing itself. So to mesa people, a thing is not just the sum of its components. Like, it is the sum of its components, but it has there's a lot packed into this like ontologically real thing. Whereas to a meta person, they're just like, oh, everything is just the sum of its components. Nothing has meaning. Everything is just these little nodes that contribute to make something. So metas might know how their phone works better because they think about all the different little components of the screen, the button, the transistors, whatever. But a mesa maybe will use their phone better because they're just viewing it as its own object. They don't like extrapolate the little details inside the phone. So yeah. And then of course, physiotype is the entire point of physiotype is that you can infer all these things from people's appearances and their gait and the way they talk.
To map this to MBTI, prone and supine map pretty well with T versus F in MBTI, so thinking versus feeling. So thinking for MBTI would be prone for physiotype, and then feeling for MBTI would be supine for physiotype. Universal maps good with N for MBTI. So universal for physiotype, N or intuitive for MBTI. Local then would map with sensing. So S for MBTI, local for physiotype. And then meta versus mesa doesn't map with any specific dichotomy that's defined in MBTI, but the cognitive functions, any SI, FETI would be meta functions. And then SENI, TEFI would be mesa functions. And if you're still confused, we have a blog that'll be in the show notes that'll explain this better than us.
Perfect.
Okay, cool.
QA.
So the first two questions are, which types are easiest for you to get along with? And the second question was asking about compatibility between types. So yeah, let's combine this into the two. Personally, Colby, what types do you most easily get along with?
STPs, NTJs, and NFPs. And NTPs.
Okay. Any reasons why?
No, I mean, there is no reason. It's biological. I mean, there's a reason, but it's not like, physiotype's about chemistry.
So you feel you have the most chemistry when you're talking to those people?
Yeah.
Like the most flow,
Yes.
I guess? Would that be descriptive?
That's correct. And if I see one of those people, I'm like, oh, they seem cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. For me, NTPs, SFPs, NFPs are probably the types that I get along with the easiest. And like you say, like I have the most flow with. I have friends that are many different types, but all the people I have the best flow with are those types. And STPs. I get along pretty well with STPs as well.
Interesting. And then, so of course, yeah, there is maybe in a later episode, we can do a whole one about like compatibility or like what type you tend to be friends with, or what we see in nature of like who people marry and stuff. But there is a system. I think there's a formula actually that we have had at one point. I can kind of like I can rattle off the different types that tend to gravitate towards each other. But I think there is a way to a couple sentences that comprise the entire thing where you could infer type to type attraction, whether it's friends, romantic, or whatever.
Especially romantic, I feel like there's a stronger pattern than even just platonically. And like we've said before, like this is all dealing with averages. So like never expect one person to not be someone you'd get along well with just because they're a certain type. This is looking at like the general population and what people tend to gravitate towards. But yeah, so like romantically speaking, basically any type that you share some functions with, you're likely to get along with.
Or share no functions with.
Right. Or if you share no functions with them, but you are both either universal or local.
Yes. So SFPs, SFJs, NTPs, NTJs, NFPs, NFJs, so on and so forth.
Again, this is all speaking in averages. But like there's plenty of NFPs and SFPs that are together, and they share FI and TE. And there's plenty of NFPs and NTPs that are together, and they share NESI. So if you're not going to share any functions with each other, or we would expect you both to be either local or both to be universal. Otherwise, it doesn't matter as long as you're sharing something in common.
And that's just on average, so don't worry about it too much. All right, next question.
Are there any self-administrable tests for physiotype?
Yes. Self-administrable. No, I was going to say, send us a picture of your face. So no, if there was a self-administrable test for physiotype, that would be huge, right? Because basically what we need to do is we need to be able to type someone and me and Alex will say what type they are based on looking only at their face. And then separately have some other method by which they fall into that same category based on some type of non-physical features. If we actually had that, then we would be 10 steps ahead of where we are now. That's our main interest right now.
Right. If we could have a test, if we could give someone a test and us write down what type they are before they take the test, and not tell them what we wrote down, obviously, and then have them take the test and them come to the same result that we did just by looking at them, like, the science of psychology would be different. That would be huge. However, we do not have a test we can give people.
If we had that, it would be we would write a paper, we'd do some publishing, and it doesn't even have to be self-administrable. I mean, that'd be great, but I would be happy even if we had, there's a physical typing, and then me and Alex administrate some other not very very non-physical thing, something mental, and it also comes to the same conclusions.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I mean, even like brain scans.
Yeah, so like the brainwave research we were doing, which we'll talk about later, that wasn't self-administratable, but that would still be very good evidence for physiotype. Do you guys ever disagree on physiotypes for someone? Yes, but we're very agreeable people in general, so it's not really a big deal. We usually end up coming to the same conclusion.
Yeah. And usually the times that we have disagreed, it's been like two very close types that, two functions are off, or we're debating whether it's an STP or an NFJ and just which side of the inverse they are, that kind of thing. It's very, very rare for like one of us to be like, they're an NTP, and the other one to be like, no, they're an STJ or something. I don't know. You know what I'm saying.
What do we base our predictions on? That's kind of already clear. I guess we can mention that real quick. Do you want to?
Yeah, MBTI bases its predictions either on consultants, quote unquote, that are licensed with the Myers-Briggs Association, I forget the name of the organization, that go and type people, or self-administered tests, both of which are based on answers that people give. So, while physiotype is based, first and foremost, well, maybe based might be the wrong word, but first and foremost, we are looking at a physiological aspect, not answers that people give us. Today's episode is sponsored by people like you. We have a Patreon, link below in the show notes. Why join the Patreon? Well, we look on our Patreon first for questions for our Q&A videos. When it comes to us looking for people to interview in the near future, we will be looking at our Patreon first. So if you would like to be interviewed and you think you know what type you are, or if you know what type you are, come check us out on Patreon. Thank you to all our Patreoners. Next one. Does personality type trap you in a box that you can't get out of?
Can I take this one?
Sure.
Yes, but it's a very large box. So we do believe that physiotypes are immutable, meaning they do not change. But we're not saying we don't believe in free will. Physiotype doesn't make any claims about free will. So there's always that. And then there's also different function stacks. You could be a SFJ that has high TI, or an SFJ that has very low TI, etc. So those things matter as well. And physiotype isn't super diagnostic anyways, so that's why I say it's a big box, because there's a lot you can do within physiotype. It's kind of just more the way you think. It's very mildly diagnostic of behaviors, I think.
Yeah.
So it's a big box. Go ahead and believe you have free will. That's a good thing in general.
I would go as far to say as it's a much bigger box than what MBTI, as the counterexample, gives as a personality type theory. In MBTI, me as an ENFP, you would expect to be soft and sensitive and super smart, and any person that falls outside of those basic descriptors, you're likely to get typed as like an ENTP or an STP or an SFP.
Coincidentally, Alex, you are all those things. You are soft and sensitive and super smart.
No, I'm not, okay? However, in Physiotype, you can be an NFP. Granted, like, harder NFPs are kind of rare, so it's a little bit less good of an example, but you can be an NFP and still have higher TE. You can be an NFP and be a bit more prone than the NFP next to you. You can, NTJs and MBTI have this stigma of being super not airheaded. Ditzy might be the word.
Head in the clouds, dreamy.
Yeah, like head in the clouds, dreamy, and also have like the stereotype of being rude and being completely unaware of social interactions. And like, while that might be true with some NTJs and Physiotype, those are not definitive in Physiotype. You can be an NTJ that is a nice, genuinely nice person. You can be an NTJ that is driven and focused on the people around them and on the things around them. But I digress. Basically, yes, I agree with you. It's a box. It's a very big box that allows for a lot of personal growth and a lot of change.
Yeah, and it's important to me, this is kind of related, it's important to me that we gain empirical evidence for Physiotype. So I don't want to be too because I don't want our listeners to think that when we're saying, oh, it's a very big box, it doesn't really trap you into a box, it's a very big box. I don't want them to think that we're saying this so that we have a non-falsifiable theory. We are working towards a non-falsifiable thing. We want it to be falsifiable. So the fact is, it is a big box, but that doesn't mean that it's not falsifiable. So we are working on defining the borders of that box, and the borders will definitely be defined by averages. And then we can have a fuzzy box for individuals, and that'll be smaller, but like a bigger box with severe distinct borders for averages.
Mm-hmm.
Like, on average, there's this many STPs doing this, and that's a fact, that kind of thing. So
yeah. And I mean, we do have lines. The issue is the lines we have drawn are, people are living things. People are conscious people. So the lines we draw for example, NE versus NI, the lines we draw that NE is meta and NI is mesa, and that we'd expect NI to be much better at visualizing things and NE be much better at subcategorizing. Like, these are lines that we're drawing. However, these are lines that are hard to see in behavior without doing something self-administered. And then, if we just rely on self-administration, we're running into the same problems that MBTI has. You can't ask an NTP, how well do you visualize, and ask them to actually give you like a good answer if they've only seen their own visualizations, So like an NTP could give a 10 because they think that they visualize great, and they might be completely naive to the fact that the NTJ next to them can visualize 10 times better than they can. So it's like, we have lines. It's hard to empirically test the lines that we currently have. And that's why we're working towards more concrete lines.
Well said. Next question. Does culture cause types, or do types cause culture? Is this genetic? So this is a paraphrase question. I would love to start with this one, if that's okay, Alex.
Yes, please do.
So yeah, different cultures have more of certain types. This is because Physiotype is 100% genetic, and because it's 100% genetic, I think for the most part, types cause culture more than culture causes types. Obviously, this doesn't mean that types are the sole creator of culture. I'm sure they're the minority They have an influence on culture, but they're probably not the greatest influence on culture. It's fairly strong, but culture influences types, or types influence culture more than culture influence types for sure. And yeah, it's all genetic. Would love to find the exact gene for different types. That's a long way off. Yeah, so just as three examples I have in my head. Western white people, and I think Ashkenazi Jews too, tend to be any people. A bit of any. I mean, any dom is not super common. It's not like rare or anything, but they are relatively any high, extroverted, intuiting. So that would be in physiotype. That would be meta universal high, relatively meta universal high. Black Americans are there's lots of STPs and NFJs, so they're very TI heavy. So lots of STPs and NFJs. That's partially why Black Americans have great voices. NFJs often have wonderful voices, or STPs too if they're balanced well. And then Eritreans, I think, I don't know. This is less confidence, but I think Eritreans, for instance, are fairly FI culture.
To add to that, I can't speak for all South America, but Colombia is very, very SE heavy. Lots and lots of STPs, lots and lots of SFPs.
Yeah, Latin culture has lots of SE, huh?
Yeah.
That's why they're so fun.
Honestly. I was about to say, could you imagine a culture of very heavy SI being a culture that is known for its dancing and known for its exotic cuisines? And
absolutely not. Yeah, and this is a great physiotype. Another reason why physiotype is cool is because it explains why white people can't dance. And like why on average Western white dance culture is lacking, it seems. And literally, I believe it is. I mean, we all say this as jokes, but if it's actually true, it's actually quite interesting and meaningful. Everyone believes it's true, but we just kind of joke about it. But if it's true, it's actually quite interesting. The fact that whites aren't as good as dancing as, let's say, like white Americans are not as good at dancing as Black Americans. That sounds crazy. Like, it's a funny joke that we all say, but like there's an actual reason for it that physiotype can explain. Generally, we can have a whole episode about dancing and rhythm, but yeah, I think a physiotype has a decent explanation for that kind of phenomenon.
I agree.
Obviously, there's exceptions. We're talking about averages here, people.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Culture is a great way of looking at an average without having the empirical data for that entire population.
Yeah.
Because you expect a culture to represent the majority, usually.
Okay, here's another one. I guarantee you, white Americans per capita, white Americans like techno music more than Black Americans. That's another thing I'm going to say. I don't have evidence for it. That's a prediction.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah. But I would be very interested to find out, to be honest. Something that just occurred to me now as well is, I can't speak for all South Americans. I can only speak for Colombians. But Colombians are very, very prone to protesting. Very prone to protesting. Any little thing, and they'll protest. I think you see that more, and first off because of SE, and second off because of lots of high TI and high willingness of disagreeableness.
Yeah.
And again, I'm talking like I looked at people's faces first, realized how many STPs there were, and then started thinking about all the cultural implications that could have, and then started thinking about how, wow, they dance a lot, wow, they protest like crazy, so this isn't really me thinking, oh, they protest a lot, so they must be STP.
You came to the two conclusions separately.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like you said, like that means something.
Yeah. And you're for our viewers, you're half Colombian, is that right?
Half Colombian, half Puerto Rican.
Half Puerto Rican. Okay. So our viewers know as well, I am half white and half white.
Beautiful.
And I am not the exception to the rule that whites tend to not be able to dance very well.
There's so much we could talk about there, but I think you're right in that we should devote a whole episode to that.
I mean, like half these questions we could devote whole episodes to.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you enjoyed the episode, or if you didn't, if you loved it, if you hated it, please feel free to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you listen to your podcast. It helps us a lot. It helps us figure out if you guys are enjoying it, what we should do to change. Even if you don't want to type out a full-length review, leaving us some stars would be more than enough. Again, we appreciate you listening in, and we hope you enjoyed it. And we will see you in the next episode.